They don't intend for you to move this mic. What a joy it is to be with you today. This is my first time at Chautauqua, and I think I'm in love. So I know why all of you are here. And thank you for coming out in spite of the threats of rain. I heard the alarm this morning about the tornado that was in the area, perhaps. So I'm glad that we're all here together. It's not lost on me that I have the privilege of presenting this lecture at Chautauqua as our nation is literally reeling between two distinct interpretations of what this nation has been and who we, as its current inhabitants, are called to be. We are faced, as we always are, with a democratic process that offers a choice between two imperfect candidates, neither of which, according to the Brookings Institute, reflect current racial, ethnic, gender, or age population projections for the next 2 decades. In spite of these shifting demographics, neither candidate represents the futuring necessary to secure democracy here and abroad. One leader is firmly planted in a nightmarish nostalgia of a nation that was great for the few, the wealthy, and the white. The other leader believes in democracy in and for the U.S. and is yet unwilling to address growing dissatisfaction among multi-generational, multi-ethnic voices who are weary of slow to no progress on policy changes that affect the everyday lives of people here and abroad. For the most part, the question is not which choice is most problematic. The answer to that question is clearly dependent upon what type of country one desires. But increasingly, the question has become, why are these our choices in the first place? Perhaps the writings of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King provide a glimpse into the challenge of the question posed in this year's gathering. Dr. King opens, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" by recalling the day in August 1965 when President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act at the Capitol building. Writing in 1967, he observed that for all of the hope and expectation that surrounded it, the historic legislation had not brought full liberation or equality for Black Americans. Anti-Black discrimination and violence continued, fueled by the groundswell of a powerful white backlash. I suggest a similar atmosphere of hope and expectation saturated the country on November 4th, 2008, when Senator Barack Hussein Obama was elected as the 44th President of the United States of America. And similarly, this historic election did not bring full liberation or equity for Black Americans. Anti-Black discrimination and violence continued, and a resurgence of white backlash began with such vengeance that on the night of Barack Obama's inauguration, a group of top GOP luminaries quietly gathered in a Washington steakhouse to lick their wounds and ultimately create the outline of a plan for how to deal with the incoming administration. Frank Luntz, political consultant and pollster and host of this clandestine meeting, told Frontline in an interview, "The room was filled. It was a who's who of ranking members who had at one point been committee chairmen or in the majority, who now wondered out loud whether they were in the permanent minority." And herein lies the fuel of white backlash: fear. The Census Bureau projects that the U.S. will dramatically increase in population and become more diverse by 2050, with the percentage of non-Hispanic white people falling below 50% for the first time since the founding of this nation. What might this mean to a population that identifies itself from inception with conquest shaped around the false ideology of a dominant race? After 3 hours of strategizing at that steakhouse on November 4th, That crowd that included Senate power brokers Jim DeMint, John Kyle, and Tim Coburn, and conservative Congressman Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, and Paul Ryan, decided before President Obama even served a day in the White House that they needed to fight him on everything. And fight they did. There was indeed much progress thwarted, chiefly the naming of a third Supreme Court justice. And yet, despite the unified opposition, President Obama signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act, restoring basic protection against pay discrimination for women, announced a plan to responsibly end the war in Iraq, and then brought the troops home, created 2 billion private sector jobs in the last 14 months of his presidency, captured terrorists and killed Osama bin Laden, rescued the American auto industry and restored its profitability, managed several national disasters successfully, helped deter a downward spiral in the stock market, championed health care reform by implementing the Affordable Health Care Act, passed the Fair Sentencing Act, increased transparency in the nation's highest office by being the first president to live stream every White House event, improved school nutrition with Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act, granted more clemencies and commutations than the last 11 preceding presidents combined, and did all of that without even a hint of personal or family scandal in the entire 8 years of his presidency. In reviewing transcripts from that frontline interview with Frank Luntz, I was surprised at the presumption that President Obama had no idea what the Republicans were planning. My presumption is the exact opposite. How could he not have an idea that there would be backlash and a plan? After all, since the European settler colonization of this land, there has always been a plan. There was a plan in 1492 when Columbus journeyed across the Atlantic to discover an already discovered new world. There was a plan in 1620 when exiles from England set sail on the Mayflower seeking a place to live free from religious oppression, landed in Plymouth Bay, Massachusetts, and imposed settler colonialism on the Wampanoag people who had lived there for 10,000 years before the settlers arrived. Author and associate professor of religious studies at George Mason University, John G. Grimes, in his book, They Knew They Were Pilgrims, writes, "They preserved their own liberty by denying it to others." There was a plan in 1776 when the 13 colonies ratified the Declaration of Independence without Thomas Jefferson's condemnation of slavery that was included in the first draft. The words penned, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," are written against the backdrop of the enslaved. There has always been a project, and there has always been a plan. So I'm not sure why Project 2025 comes as such a surprise to so many people. As a matter of fact, I hope everybody who's running for president has a plan. Spearheaded by the Heritage Foundation, Project 2025 is a proposed presidential transition plan that is composed of 4 pillars: a policy guide for the next presidential administration, a LinkedIn-style database of personnel who could serve in the next administration, training for that pool of candidates dubbed the Presidential Administration Academy, and a playbook of actions to be taken within the first 180 days of office. Much of the criticism of Project 2025 involves its first pillar, the nearly 900-page policy book that plays out an overhaul of the federal government. called Mandate for Leadership 2025, The Conservative Promise. The book builds on a mandate for leadership first published in January 1981, which sought to serve as a roadmap for Ronald Reagan's incoming administration. The Heritage Foundation also created a mandate for leadership in 2015, ahead of Trump's first term. 2 years into his presidency, it touted that Trump had instituted 64% of its policy recommendations, ranging from leaving the Paris Climate Accord, increasing military spending, and increasing offshore drilling and developing federal lands. Elections have consequences, my friends, no matter what candidate or political party prevails. I was present in Charlottesville on August 11, 2017, during the Unite the Right rally. I was also present August 10th at St. Paul's Memorial Church, located directly across the street from the rally site, where a pre-scheduled interfaith service was held to encourage counter-protesters the night before the rally. I'd been invited to come and preach at that service. As a child of Birmingham, Alabama, born in the 60s, I am quite familiar with and unafraid of the public Klan marches in the South. It was not unusual for the Klan to publicly parade down the business district streets of Birmingham in some organized rallying fashion. I'd seen it, and that is what I expected to see in Charlottesville. What I was not prepared for was the absence of the hoods and sheets that hid faces and the young age of most of the hundreds of participants who were holding tiki torches, chanting things like, "You will not replace us. Jews will not replace us." Whose streets? Our streets, which is ironically a chant formed in Ferguson. What makes this politically charged moment particularly challenging in the U.S. is the resurgence of white backlash wearing the familiar garb of white Christian nationalism unashamedly and unapologetically for all of the world to see. It is important to state the obvious here in this setting. White Christian nationalism, like religious nationalism globally, is not about religion. It is a political ideology that can be traced back to the late 1600s, in which adherents believe in the idea that America was founded by white male Christians who modeled its laws and institutions after Protestant ideals, with a mission to spread their religion and those ideals in the face of threats from non-whites, non-Christians, and immigrants. It does not hold identity for all Christians. Neither is it reflective of all white people. However, by claiming Christian identity, those promoting this political agenda are using malformed and misinformed religion to stoke fear. As I prepare to be with you to engage this week's subject matter, what we got wrong, my goodness, that's a broad topic. And learning from our mistakes through the eyes of the marginalized, this resurgence came to mind. In the midst of a socio-political context that has so distorted the moral compass of our society, blurring the line of demarcation between just and unjust actions within a pluralistic society, it is challenging to know where to begin. There's a West African proverb that states, "Until the lion tells its own story, the hunter will always be the hero." May I suggest to you this afternoon that what we've gotten wrong is the story itself. Inundated with distorted facts, subjective news outlets promoting biased accounts, and rampant allegations of false reporting, no matter what empirical data might easily be available, the question Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, you know I'm a preacher, so I have to get that in there. What is truth remains relevant today. For those of the Christian faith, there is an absolute truth in the existence of God. This is a truth shared by all Abrahamic traditions and perhaps some others beyond, even if the naming of that divine presence differs. But this absolute truth is a narrow sliver of knowing that quickly evolves into varying perspectives of the nature, character, and manifestations of this God we believe exists. Same God, different interpretations of God, different perspectives on the truths this God provides. Even within our religious cocoons, perspectives differ. Our sacred texts are not mere replicas of one another, and depending on the time and history in one's social location, our experiences with and interpretations of those texts may also differ. Religion has long been used to fuel division and subjugate the other under the banner of God. And religion has also been historically manipulated to affirm the socio-political needs of the day. Every project implemented since the founding of this nation has been accompanied by dangerous use of biblical text to maintain white political, social, and economical dominance. In 2018, Fisk University partnered with the Museum of the Bible. Did you know there was a Museum of the Bible? And the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture for a special exhibition featuring the rare slave Bible. There are only 3 known copies of the slave Bible in existence. 1 copy belongs to Fisk University, and the other 2 are located in the UK. The original slave Bible was published by Law and Gilbert Publishing House in London in 1807 and was used in the British West Indian Islands. The copy belonging to Fisk University was published the following year. It was published on behalf of the Society for the Conversion of Negro Slaves to educate enslaved Africans and preserve the system of slavery. What's notable about this Bible is not just its rarity, but its content, or rather its lack of content. The Bible excludes any portion of text that might inspire rebellion or liberation. The Bible excludes 90% of the First Testament and 50% of the Second Testament. Just to place this in perspective for you, there are 1,189 chapters in a standard Protestant Bible. This Bible, curated for the conversion of the enslaved, contains only 232. It was taught and preached as truth to the enslaved. And yet, somehow, without the benefit of being able to read for themselves, the enslaved received these teachings and mysteriously found their way to a liberating God hidden away in the crevices left from the missing parts. I am reminded of poet Lucille Clifton's words penned in her poem, "Won't You Celebrate With Me?" Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed. How how methodically we craft stories that tell dominant truths, that inform dominant perspectives through lens shaped by the lives we've fashioned for ourselves. Truth remains a difficult concept. Objective truth most certainly exists and can be proved in the physicality. The universe has its origins, its composition, and its destiny, and so do we. The difficulty lies not in acknowledging that, but in accessing the truth that lies behind it. Our attempt to access the truth behind the objective data usually manifests in one of three ways. Normative truth is what we as a group agree to as true. Language is often changed this way. Relevant to our time together, what does Christianity really mean now? Subjective truth is how the individual sees or experiences the world. COVID is a good example of that. For marginalized groups, the COVID crisis is far from over. Complex truth recognizes the validity of all these perspectives and allows us to focus on the one most useful at any given time. White Christian nationalism is a case study for what happens when truths are eroded. America was built upon a false notion of race, and its ongoing political, economic, and social structure is fueled by deliberate construction of a biblical narrative to support the lie. We've had a rise in anti-Asian deaths and hatred, a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, a rise in anti-LGBTQ hate, and vitriolic efforts against trans rights that have at least caused me in St. Louis, Missouri, that is now known as St. Louis, Missouri, to lose some friends who had to relocate for the safety of their children. And the bodily autonomy of women is now greatly in danger. The list goes on and on. We've withstood an attempted insurrection at our nation's capital and continuing assertions of a stolen election despite absolutely no evidence to suggest that is true. Racial divides are increasing, and the Bible is once again being weaponized to increase and maintain violence. So perhaps the place we can use some of our time together this afternoon is to consider this dangerous juxtaposition of religion and race, which I believe to be critical to disarming the threat posed by the ideology of white Christian nationalism. No amount of research into the biophysical or genetic features of individuals or groups will explain the social phenomenon of race. The position taken by many anthropologists, both biological and social, and increasingly many other scholars in the social sciences, is that race is not a real thing. Race is neither an anthropological, biological, or theological truth. Race is nowhere in the Bible. Race is a cultural and social construct. When George Floyd was publicly strangled to death while handcuffed on a street in Minneapolis in 2020 by a white police officer, neither that officer's actions nor the lack of forceful action by officers accompanying him can be explained by examining their genes or biology. We cannot explain racially based hiring or discrimination by references to human biological difference. This does not mean that the existence of race as a social construct has no effect. Because of several hundreds of years of racism, during which both physical and psychological oppression have characterized the lives and environments of those people seen as members of non-white races, there are differences in health status and lifestyles among them. They have appeared and continue to impact us all. In St. Louis, where I currently reside, there is a street called Delmar Boulevard. No matter where you live, there is a Delmar Boulevard near you. Delmar Boulevard stands as a stark reminder of how deeply impactful racism has been in our region. So pronounced are the social, economic, educational, and physical differences across Delmar Boulevard that the street is also known as the Delmar Divide. On the north side of Delmar, you have large homes that are now in disrepair because the people who live in them cannot afford to care for them. On the north side of Delmar, there are no hospitals, no health clinics, no trauma centers, in spite of the largest percentage of trauma happening on the north side. On the north side of Delmar, there are few grocers that have healthy vegetables and options for people to eat well. It is inundated with corner store little shops that sell chips and things that have no nutritional value. On the north side of Delmar, a house can be purchased for around $35,000 to $40,000. And the majority of children educated on the north side of Delmar, because education is attached to property taxes, are undereducated and under-resourced. On the south side of Delmar, we have some of the most exclusive educational institutions in the nation. Washington University is on the south side of Delmar, as is St. Louis University. BJC Healthcare System, the largest healthcare system in the entire state of Missouri, is on the south side of Delmar. And here is the part that I hope will make you gasp. That across this one street, there is a 26-year lifespan difference between a white man living in the south side of Delmar and a black man living on the north side of Delmar. In the middle of the 20th century, a new generation of historians began to take another look at the beginning of the American experience. They spent decades exploring all of the original documents relating to the establishment of colonies in America. And what these scholars discovered was that our 19th and 20th century ideas and beliefs about race did not exist in the 17th century. Race originated as a folk idea, an ideology about human difference. It was a social invention, not a product of science. Historians have documented when, and to a great extent, how race as an ideology came into our culture and our consciousness. But the question is not only how, but why. I propose to you today that race was socially constructed solely for the purpose of securing wealth for the few. A good example of this history is the colony of Georgia. In the mid-18th century, this colony was founded by followers of John Wesley, founder of Methodism, and with the objective of settling poor people from Europe. The founders and the organizers had an anti-slavery policy, and Georgia became the first non-slave-holding colony. I know some people didn't know that. Can't tell it now, but that's how it started. The experiment failed. The settlers endured hunger and disease and poverty, and many died. And soon, they petitioned the trustees to alter the policy and to allow slaves, arguing for their survival. Nearly 20 years after its founding, the act prohibiting slavery was repealed, and Georgia began to prosper. The physical, language, and cultural differences between Africans and Europeans made Africans a vulnerable target of discrimination by those seeking to secure wealth on foreign land. And ironically, the religious persecution that caused the early settlers to flee Europe now became a tool used to sanctify the oppression of others. The doctrine of discovery was a series of papal bulls issued by the Roman Catholic Church in the 15th century that justified European colonization in the name of Christianity. The bulls gave European Catholic nations the right to take control of other land, subdue the people who lived there, and convert them to Christianity. The doctrine of discovery was first articulated in 1452 by Pope Nicholas V in his papal bull, Until Different. The bull gave his approval to the appropriation of regions in West Africa. It was reiterated in 1455, and his most well-known version was issued in 1493 by Pope Alexander VI, granting Spain possession of the New World. The doctrine of discovery has been adapted over the past 500 years to enable colonial land theft around the world and continues to form the basis for injustices related to land and resource rights. For example, the American colonies used the doctrine of discovery against native nations from 1606 onward. And Thomas Jefferson used it to exert American authority in the Louisiana Territory and win the Pacific Northwest. The doctrine of discovery has even been cited in court cases as recently as 2005, City of Sherrill versus Oneida Indian Nation of New York. In part, this religious document, carrying the authority of the church, boldly declared that non-Christians had no souls, and therefore any land not inhabited by Christians was available to be discovered, claimed, and exploited by Christian rulers. And equally important is the assertion that any non-Christian harmed or killed in such conquest are not judged as sinful in the eyes of God. The doctrine of discovery also declared that the Catholic faith and the Christian religion be exalted and be everywhere increased and spread, that the health of souls be cared for, and that barbarous nations be overthrown and brought to the faith itself. And although Pope Francis formally repudiated this doctrine in 2023, the harm caused is irrevocable. The rhetoric of every project of conquest since the forming of America began is clothed in the harmful religious ideology of white Christian dominance. And now, once again, as Reverend Otis Moss III shared in a recent sermon, our democracy is at risk. What we are currently witnessing, my friends, in our country is the 21st century version of a battle for dominance cloaked in religious rhetoric that can be traced back to the first settlers in this country. For instance, William Bradford, who was the governor of the Plymouth colony, in his history explained that he and his fellow colonists-to-be took comfort in the fact that they knew they were pilgrims. This reference to the epistle Hebrews, the 11th chapter to be exact, from the Second Testament, which teaches that all Christians are strangers and pilgrims on this earth. The Mayflower passengers and other early Plymouth colonies began being known as pilgrims only around the turn of the 19th century. I am becoming increasingly convinced our political system offers no pathway to the complete actualization of democracy that is full, informed, equal, and with equal participation in wide aspects of political, economic, and cultural decision-making, independent of financial investment and resources, without the intentional deconstruction of Christian theologies of chosenness that result from the misappropriation of biblical text as God's commentary on a holy people, rather than a people's commentary on a holy God. Both whites and non-whites have been scarred in their daily lives by the exclusionary rhetoric to which we have all been conditioned. Such demonization of the other has widened the chasms between us, justified inexcusable violence among us, and allowed us to justify disproportionate advantages of the few over the many solely as failures of those whose opportunities for success were robbed from them in the beginning. Such disparities, I suggest, are not functions of race, but of racism. Racism is a sin with a root system that so acutely damages non-white people all over the world and cannot be contained in designated locations, nor can it coexist with other viable, life-giving ways of being in the world. And the sin of racism has had deleterious effects on those that identify as white based on the color of their skin, by creating within them an internalized expectation of superiority that is non-existent and therefore unachievable. Racism anchored its roots in religious soil, and the existential dilemma is this: because we are here and because we are free, we are responsible. Knowing the broader context in which our ideas and beliefs evolved gives us a better understanding of who we are as human beings. By expanding freedom and opening up access to cultural knowledge for all people, it may well be that we will come closer to the ideals of equality and opportunity. A few years ago, I was invited to do something that I don't normally do, to take a retreat without any of my electronics. That is like asking me to take a retreat without food. But I followed my friend, a Buddhist priest, who suggested that time away from such things creates a healthier life. In the midst of Fish Lake National Forest, which is located in central Utah, there is a giant organism of male quaking aspen trees, fondly called the trembling giant, but formerly known as Pando Forest. While many trees spread through flowering and sexual reproduction, quaking aspens usually reproduce asexually by sprouting new trees from the expansive lateral root of the parent. Pando is an enormous clonal colony of approximately 47,000 male quaking aspen trees, covering 107 acres and weighing more than 6,000 tons. And although the trees in this colony don't look alike physically, they are genetically identical because all of the trees share a single root system that is more than 80,000 years old. This makes Pando one of the largest and oldest living organisms on Earth, with a shared root that holds memory far greater than the life of any one tree. When the Pando clone was discovered, scientists named it with a Latin word that means "I spread." Pando is an aspen clone that originated from a single seed and spreads by sending up new shoots from the expanding root system. The health of the root determines the health of the fruit. Although this lecture is not about silviculture or the broader aspects of forestry, this lived reality of my embodiment as licensed health and healing arts provider, diversity trainer, and public theologian lead me to explore the question before us by interrogating our religious landscape through the broad lens of Christianity in the U.S. Because no matter our stories of origin, We now share a democracy that stems from a single root, whose seed was neither religious nor racial. The separation of church and state is fundamental to preservation of that root. President John Adams is famously quoted as saying, "There never was a democracy yet that did not commit suicide." The preservation of democracy as we know it, and the hope of all that democracy can truly be, is worth fighting for, my friends. And I believe that winning that fight will save us all. Thank you.